Hello, Synapse community. My name is Ryan Majitimer, and I'm a product manager on the Azure Synapse Analytics team. For those of you in the know, today we announced Synapse Link for SQL. I've got with me Chuck Heinzelman, and he's going to give us all of the details. I'm going to hand it over to Chuck to introduce himself and tell us, what is this Synapse Link for SQL thing?
Thanks, Ryan. My name is Chuck Heinzelman, and I am a Principal PM Manager on the Azure SQL Database team, and I have been focusing the last several months on bringing out Azure Synapse Link for SQL. Azure Synapse Link for SQL is a new technology that allows you to seamlessly move data from your operational databases into Azure Synapse Analytics. In the past, people have had to write ETL pipelines and have them run on a schedule. With Azure Synapse Link for SQL, we allow you to automate the process of moving that data from your operational stores into Azure Synapse Analytics, and we let you do it in near real time.
What customer scenarios would this be good for?
Azure Synapse Link for SQL is going to benefit anyone who wants to automate the movement of data from their operational stores, either in Azure SQL Database or in SQL Server 2022 on premises. But a few key scenarios that come to mind for me are customers that are running a hybrid organization where they have some of their data in the cloud and some of their data on premises, where they want to have a common analytics platform. Well, we can use Azure Synapse Link for SQL to bring all that data together into a common analytical platform. Another thing that comes to mind is a company that grows by acquisitions, and they want to quickly bring the data from their disparate systems that they've acquired across the globe into a centralized location.
Can we see it in action?
Absolutely. Let me switch over to my demo environment. What I'd like to do now is show you the power of Azure Synapse Link for SQL in getting data from my on-premises world into Azure for analytics. What I have here is an on-prem SQL Server 2022 instance with a database on it called Wide World Importers On-Prem. And just to show you that there is data in this thing, I'm going to run this query. And we see here we have 402 rows in this database, or in this table within this database, pardon me. What I would like to do now is get this data into Azure Synapse. To do that, I'm going to use Synapse Link for SQL. To do this, I actually do the setup in Azure Synapse Studio. So I'm going to switch over to that and show you the prerequisites that we've created under the hood. Now, this is going to be very cooking show style because I don't want to take the time to go through and create all of these, but I'm going to show you what they are and what we need. So the first thing that we need is a dedicated SQL pool in Azure Synapse Analytics. This is where the data is going to land when we bring it over from your on-prem SQL Server into the cloud. You can choose what size SQL pool you want, but it does need to be a dedicated SQL pool. In addition to that, we need to create some linked services. So to work with SQL Server on premises, we need obviously a linked service to that SQL Server so that we can connect to it. We also need an ADLS Gen 2 storage account. And this works as the landing zone for the data that's coming from on-prem into Azure Synapse. We do this way so that the on-prem SQL Server has a buffer to write into, and then the ingestion service can pick that data up from that buffer and load it into the dedicated SQL pool. We also need to set up a self-hosted integration runtime. And that self-hosted integration runtime is what we use to communicate with the on-prem SQL Server and tell it what to do. We need to tell it that it needs to export these tables and send them up to the cloud. So those are the core prerequisites that we need to create to get this done. From here, we need to create, once we have all those done, we need to create what's called a new link. Now, I have one pre-created here. That I'm going to just walk you through and show you what the options are. When defining a link, you choose how many cores you want to use to process the data coming through. The more data you're going to be sending to Synapse, the more cores you need to use for this link. You also tell the link what the landing zone is. Remember, I mentioned we needed a landing zone from the on-prem into the cloud world, and what folder you want to use, and then you generate a SAS token for that landing zone. And this is what SQL Server uses to write the data into the landing zone. You also get to pick which tables you want. So we can see here we have a list of source tables. And then on the destination, the dedicated SQL pool, we can choose what schema and table name we want to use. We could leave it the same or we can change it. We can choose the distribution type for the table. Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pools support different distribution types. We could do round robin, where the table is just spread across the cluster. You can use a hash distribution to have certain keys land together, or you can replicate the entire table, and that's good for like if you have lookup dimensions, that type of thing that you want on every cluster node. If I get this out of the way. We can also see that we can choose the structure for our table. Do we want it to be a heap? Do we want it to be a clustered column store index? Now that I've got all this set up, what I'm going to do is I need to start this link. But before I do that, I want to prove to you that there is nothing in this SQL pool right now. So if I refresh this dedicated SQL pool, refresh the table list, there are no tables in there right now. Synapse Link is going to create those tables for me when I get the link started. So I'm going to start this link, and this takes 4 to 5 minutes to start and get running. So once it's up and running, I will be right back. So now we can see that the link connection is running. It took a little while, but it is now up and running. We can monitor it to see how it's doing. We can see here that we have a list of tables, and some of them are in replicating state, some of them are in snapshotting, some of them haven't been started yet. What's happening here is when the link started up, it is going through and SQL Server is creating initial exports of all of those tables and sending them into the landing zone so that they can be picked up and applied to the dedicated SQL pool. That's happening when we're in snapshotting mode. Now, once we get to replicating mode, these tables their initial replicas have been created on the back end, and SQL Server is now looking for changes. And as changes happen to those tables, it's going to send them back to send the changes to the landing zone to be picked up and moved into the dedicated SQL pool. So while this is still working, we can see, we got one more that's snapshotting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over and I'm going to look at these tables in the SQL Data Warehouse. And you can see here, this is how I left it the last time. If I refresh this, we can see that we now have tables that are showing up. So what I want to do is I want to query this table. So I'm going to change over to my dedicated pool. And I'm just going to do a simple count query over this table and see 402 records. If you remember from earlier in the demo, that's what we had in the initial source system. Great. Now that we have that, I'm going to go into that source system and add some more records to it. So if I come in here and I'm just going to insert, this is going to insert 50 new records. They're all going to be, basically duplicates of one. It's just, showing that we're putting more data into this system. So if I run that, we now have 50 more records. If I run this query up here, you can see here our max customer ID is now 651, and we have 452 rows showing up. So what's happening behind the scenes now is that those changes are being replicated from the on-prem SQL Server into the landing zone, and then our ingestion service is picking them up and moving them into the dedicated SQL pool. So if I come back in here, let's see if it's been done yet. There we are. Just in the time that I was explaining what's happening, those additional 452 records have been brought over into the dedicated SQL pool and are now ready for you to use on the back end.
That's pretty cool. But does it work for Azure SQL Database?
Why, yes, it does work for Azure SQL Database. What I'd like to show you now is that we have the ability to pull data from Azure SQL Database in the cloud as well as your SQL Server 2022 instances. What I have here in Management Studio, you can see the wide world importers on-prem that we worked with earlier, but we also have a database called Wide World Importers Cloud that's hosted in Azure SQL Database. These two databases have the exact same structures, they just have different data in them. So we can see here, if I run that same query that we ran before against the customers table, in this case, we get a customer ID of 1061, and we get 261 rows in this database. So I want to be able to bring this data into that dedicated SQL pool as well. So to do that, when I come back into the Synapse environment, I had to create another linked service. We had a linked service to the on-prem SQL 2022. We now have a linked service to the cloud-based Azure SQL Database. From there, I was able to go in. Now you'll notice I didn't talk about a landing zone. I didn't talk about an integration runtime. Because this is a cloud service, we're going to handle that for you. So if I come in to integrate, and look, I already have this up and running. I have a link created for the cloud databases. And you can see here where with the on-prem databases, I was going to a schema called OP underscore. For the cloud database, I'm going to a schema called C underscore. So this data is already replicating through the system. If I go into my data tab, I can see here I now have tables with C underscore for the schema prefix, as well as the OP underscore for the schema prefix. And now what I've done is I've actually created views that have the original schema name and table names on them that union these two source tables together. So if I come into this query customers query and run this, you can see this is coming from the view, and I added a column on the view called data source. So we can see when I run this that I have in this database, I have 261 customers from my cloud-based database. I have 452 customers from my on-prem database. The way this works from the replication side is the same as on-prem. When I add data or modify data in the source Azure SQL database, that data is automatically going to be replicated over to my dedicated SQL pool, and I'll be able to use the power of Azure Synapse Analytics to do analytics over both sources in one environment.
Well, that wraps up our video for today. Thanks, Chuck, for joining us. I'm sure I'm not the only person that's excited for Azure Synapse Link for SQL. Again, my name is Ryan Majidamur. You can follow me on Twitter. You can also follow Azure Synapse on Twitter. Like, subscribe, comment. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.